Picture a wooden ship riding low in the water, her belly heavy with silver bars stacked like bricks of frozen moonlight. A quick word before we go deeper. These stories don't end. There's a new unsolved one waiting here every night. If that's the kind of thing you'd leave on in the dark, subscribe and I'll keep them coming. Now back to the ship. Her name has been worn off by time, the way salt eats the paint from any letter long enough exposed. She rides on a flat green sea somewhere off the coast of what we now call Florida. The year is 1600 and something. The wood of her hull is dark Spanish oak, soaked and swollen, creaking in a low voice, like an old man easing into a chair. Her sails hang slack and yellow as old paper above her. The sky is the soft blue of a robin's egg. Below her, the water is so clear, you can see fish the color of new pennies darting through ribbons of grass. She is one of dozens. A whole fleet of these wooden giants is spread across the Gulf of Mexico that summer, bound for home. They carry chests of gold coins minted in Mexico City. They carry pearls fished by hands that will never see a peso. They carry cinnamon, cocoa, indigo dye and cakes the color of midnight. They carry cedar planks that smell so strong the pirates will later say they hunted these ships by nose alone. And then, sometime in the next 3 days, this ship simply ends. No final letter, no grave. No one in Havana ever scratches her name into a ledger of safe arrivals. She joins a long, quiet list of vessels that left a New World port loaded with treasure and never reached the other side. Her crew vanishes with her, the cook boy who scrubbed her copper pots, the soldier who carved his sweetheart's name into a beam below deck, the enslaved man who hauled water for the horses, all of them gone into a sea that keeps what it takes. This is the story we are going to sit with tonight. Not one ship, not even one fleet. We are going to talk about the long, slow disappearance of a whole world of Spanish galleons into the warm green water of the Gulf of Mexico. Some say 1,000 ships were lost down there over 3 centuries. Some say more. Nobody knows the true number. Nobody ever will. The Gulf is a strange sea. It looks calm from shore, the color of a worn jade ring, lapping gently at white sand. The fishermen mend their nets, and their children chase tiny crabs through the foam. But the Gulf hides things. It hides reefs that rise toward the surface, like the teeth of some buried animal. It hides sandbars that shift between one tide and the next. It hides hurricanes that build in the warm summer air without warning, turning a clear afternoon into a black wall of rain in the span of an hour. The Spanish learned this the hard way, ship by ship, year by year, and here is the part that keeps the mystery alive. Spain kept records like nobody else. Every chest of silver was counted twice before it left port. Every barrel of cochineal had a number. Every sailor's name was on a page somewhere in a stone building in Seville. So we know, more or less, what was put on these ships. We know what was supposed to come home. And when you set those numbers next to what actually arrived, there is a hole big enough to swallow a kingdom. That hole is still down there. Some of it lies under 20 feet of water, close enough to wade to. Some of it lies under hundreds of feet, in the soft, dark mud of the deep Gulf, where the light never reaches, and the only sound is the slow drift of cold water. Coins still wash up on certain beaches after big storms, dull and green and heavy in the palm. Divers still pull cedar planks out of the sand that smell faintly of the forests they were cut from 400 years ago. So tonight we are going to drift out into that warm green sea, slowly and gently. And we are going to ask a question that nobody has ever fully answered. How many ships did the Gulf take? What were they carrying? And what does the silence of all that lost cargo tell us about a colonial world we thought we already knew? Settle in. The water is calm tonight. The first ship is waiting. Picture the Gulf of Mexico as it looked 400 years ago. A wide, warm sea, shaped like a great bowl pressed into the belly of the continent. On its northern rim, low green coasts stretched away in every direction, fringed with sand the color of bone. On its southern rim, the jungle came right down to the water, dark and dripping, alive with parrots and the slow drift of crocodiles. The whole bowl held a sleepy blue water that looked harmless from a ship's rail, smooth as poured glass on a calm morning. That water was the busiest road in the New World. Spanish galleons crossed it every year, their sails stacked like white cliffs against the sky. Smaller ships hugged the coast, hauling sugar and hides and salted fish from one little port to another. The Gulf was Spain's secret kitchen, its hidden treasury, the soft, warm room where the empire kept its silver and its dreams. From above it looked peaceful. From below it was a graveyard with no headstones. The towns along its edge were small and sun-bleached. Veracruz, on the Mexican coast, smelled of tar and orange peel, its stone walls baking in the heat. Havana sat on the island of Cuba, like a pearl set in green velvet, its harbor crowded with masts and ropes, and the cries of gulls. Cartagena lay further south, its forts the color of old butter, its streets narrow and shaded. These ports were the beads on the great necklace of the Spanish Empire, and the thread that joined them was the Gulf itself. Inside those towns, the world moved at a slow, careful pace. Men wore wool doublets even in the heat, sweating in dark cloth, because fashion came from cold Madrid, and nobody dared dress for the weather they actually lived in. Women walked under wide black shawls. Children ran barefoot in the dust. At night, candles and oil lamps glowed behind shuttered windows, and the whole town smelled of tallow smoke, frying fish, and the salt that drifted up from the docks. The era was a strange one. Clocks were rare. Time was kept by church bells and the tide. A sailor knew the hour by the slant of the sun on his sail, and a farmer knew the season by the height of the corn. Maps were beautiful, hand-painted things, but they were also wrong in ways nobody could yet measure. Pilots steered by guess and by prayer, their instruments little more than a wooden cross with a sliding bar, a compass needle that wandered when storms came near, and a sand glass turned every half hour by the cabin boy. The Gulf itself was a trickster. Its weather could change in the time it took to drink a cup of water. A morning of blue sky and gentle wind might become an afternoon of green clouds and black rain. The shoals were the worst part. Long fingers of sand reached out from the coast for miles, hidden under only a few feet of water. A galleon drawing 20 feet of keel could rip her bottom out on a sandbar she never saw, on a sea that looked open and safe in every direction. And then there were the reefs south of Florida. Around the dry Tortugas, coral grew in shapes like cathedrals and gardens, sharp as broken pottery. North of Cuba, more reefs waited in turquoise water, so clear you could see the fish swimming above them, and never guess the rock was there until your hull split open like a melon. The Gulf hid its teeth under its smile. That was its oldest trick. The season mattered too. From June to November, the warm water bred storms. The Spanish called hurricanes, a word they had learned from the Taino people of the islands. These were beasts of wind and rain that swept across the Gulf with no warning the colonists could read. The sky would turn the color of an old bruise. The air would grow still and heavy, thick as warm wool against the skin. Then the sea would rise, and the rain would come sideways, and whole fleets would disappear in a single night. That is the world this story lives in. A wooden world, a candlelit world, a world where men crossed the great blue bowl with their pockets full of saints' medals and their holds full of silver, and where the water below them kept a long, patient ledger of everything it had taken. The Gulf was beautiful, the Gulf was deep, and the Gulf, as the Spanish would learn again and again, was very, very good at keeping secrets. The men who drew the maps of the Gulf were not heroes. They were tired clerks with ink-stained fingers and aching backs. They sat in low rooms in Seville and Havana, hunched over wide sheets of paper, copying coastlines they had never seen with their own eyes. Their candles burned low into the night. Their wives brought them weak wine and dry bread. They worked for the Spanish crown, and the crown paid them poorly. One of these men was named Alonso de Santa Cruz. He had a long grey beard that he tucked into his collar. He wore a wool cloak even in summer, because the stone floors of the Casa de Contratafación stayed cold all year. Alonso drew shorelines with a slow, steady hand. He listened to sailors who staggered off the docks in Cadiz, smelling of salt and sour rum, and he wrote down what they told him. Some of them lied, some of them were drunk, some of them spoke of reefs in places where no reef could be, and Alonso put them on the map anyway, because it was safer to warn of a danger that did not exist than to miss one that did. His maps were beautiful things. The Gulf curved across the page like a sleeping cat. Tiny ships rode the painted waves with their sails puffed out, no bigger than a fingernail. Sea monsters circled the edges, drawn with curling tongues and webbed claws. In the corners, Alonso painted compass roses in gold leaf, and the gold caught the candlelight like a small sun. But the maps were wrong. Almost all of them were wrong. The coastline of Texas was sketched too far north. The Florida Keys ran in the wrong direction. The wide, shallow shelves off the Yucatan were drawn as deep open water. Alonso did not know this. The pilots who carried his maps did not know it either, not until the sand grabbed their keels. Across the sea, in the port of Veracruz, another man named Diego Ribeiro kept a smaller workshop. Diego was younger, broader in the shoulders, with a scar across his lip from a tavern fight he no longer remembered. He drew charts for the captains who sailed between New Spain and the home country. He did not paint sea monsters. He drew sandbars. He drew the dark stains that meant shoal water. He drew the places where the bones of older ships still stuck up out of the surf at low tide. Diego had been a sailor once. He knew what the Gulf could do to a wooden hull. He had felt the long swells of August, the warm wind that came from nowhere and turned the sky the color of an old bruise. He drank too much, and he slept badly, and his hands sometimes shook when he held the quill. But his charts were better than Alonso's. The pilots who could afford them paid in silver coin, and Diego stacked the coins in a clay jar under his bed. The captains came to him in the early mornings. Before the heat, they wore leather doublets stiff with sea salt. They smelled of tar and tobacco. They argued with him about details, jabbing fingers at the parchment, growling in low voices. Diego would shrug. He would point at a thin curve of ink and say, very quietly, "Here is where the Santa Clara went down, and here the Nuestra Senora, and here the two ships whose names nobody bothered to write down." The captains would go silent. They would fold the chart and pay and leave. There were other map makers too, old Italian men in Genoa who had never crossed an ocean, Dutch traders who copied Spanish charts in secret and sold them to anyone with coin, Portuguese pilots who kept private notebooks chained to their belts. Each one believed he knew the Gulf a little better than the last. Each one was a little wrong in a different way. And so the galleons sailed out with these flawed maps tucked into oilskin pouches. Captains pinned them to the chart table by candlelight. Pilots ran calloused fingers along the painted coasts. They trusted the ink. They had to. The sea was wide and dark, and the only thing standing between a ship and the bottom was a piece of paper drawn by a man who had never tasted that particular water. Alonso died of a fever in 1572. Surrounded by half-finished charts, Diego drank himself into the ground a few years later in a room above a Veracruz wine shop. Their maps outlived them. The maps kept sailing, and the maps kept being wrong in the same gentle, patient ways, year after year, decade after decade, leading good ships toward quiet ruin. Picture a harbour town on the coast of New Spain. The year does not matter much. It could be 1560 or 1610 or 1680. The rhythm of these places stayed the same for nearly 300 years. The sun comes up slow over the water, painting the bay in soft pink and gold. Roosters caw from courtyards behind whitewashed walls. Smoke rises from kitchen fires, where women patted out corn cakes on warm clay griddles. The smell of cooking oil and wood smoke drifted through narrow streets paved in broken shell. Down at the docks, the galleons sat heavy in the green water. Their hulls were dark with tar and barnacles. Their masts rose like a forest of bare trees, tall and straight, swaying just a little in the morning breeze. Ropes thick as a man's wrist creaked against wooden cleats. Gulls wheeled overhead, white against a pale blue sky, calling out in their sharp, lonely voices. These ships did not fill up all at once. Loading a galleon took weeks, sometimes months. The cargo came from everywhere the Spanish crown had touched. Silver bars from the mines of Potosi, carried down from the high mountains on the backs of mules. Gold coins fresh from the mint in Mexico City. Crates of pearls from the Caribbean shallows. Bales of indigo dye, blue as a midnight sky. Cochineal, the deep red powder made from tiny dried beetles, worth more than its weight in almost anything. The dock workers moved slow in the heat. There, shirts were soaked through by mid-morning. They rolled barrels of cane sugar up wooden planks. They carried sacks of cocoa beans on their shoulders. Two at a time, they wrestled chests of silver coins through narrow hatches, sweating and grunting, while a clerk stood nearby with a quill and a leather book, marking down numbers in careful Spanish script. The clerks were quiet men. They wore dark wool even in the worst heat. They licked the tips of their quills and made small, neat marks on long lists. Every coin had to be counted, every bar weighed, every barrel tagged. The king in Madrid wanted to know exactly what was on each ship. He wanted his fifth share, the famous quinta real, and he wanted it down to the last grain of silver dust. But the manifests never told the whole story. Captains carried private cargo too. Boxes hidden under floorboards, coins sewn into the hems of coats, small treasures meant for wives back home, or debts that needed paying, or bribes to grease a quiet hand at the customs house in Seville. The galleons grew heavier than the books said they were. They sat lower in the water than they should have. In the late afternoon, the loading slowed. Workers stretched their backs and wandered into shaded taverns near the waterfront. The taverns had cool stone floors and walls thick enough to keep the heat outside. Wine came in clay cups. Stews bubbled in iron pots. Old sailors sat at corner tables and told stories about storms they had survived, about ships they had seen go down, about the strange green light that sometimes danced on the mastheads before a hurricane. The younger sailors listened. They were 16, 17, 18 years old. Some of them had never seen open water. They had signed on for the wages, or for the chance to see the great cities of Spain, or because there was nothing left for them. On the small farms where they were born, they drank slowly and watched the older men with quiet eyes. At night, the harbour went still. Lanterns swung on the sterns of the galleons, casting yellow circles on the black water. The watch sailors paced the decks, their footsteps soft on wet wood. Frogs sang in the marshes outside town. Somewhere a guitar played, slow and sad, the notes drifting out over the bay. A priest walked along the quay with a small lantern, blessing each ship as he passed, mumbling Latin words into the warm dark. This was the ordinary world. This was the rhythm of the colonial Gulf for generation after generation. Ships came in light and went out heavy. Men loaded silver by day and drank wine by night. The clerks wrote their numbers. The captains made their secret plans. The priests said their prayers. The galleons grew heavier and heavier as the weeks passed. They drank up the wealth of 2 continents. They swelled with cargo that the king wanted, and cargo that nobody on land would ever know about. The captains of those Spanish ships were not just sailors. They were believers, deep, quiet, stubborn believers in a world where saints walked the decks beside them, and the sea answered to powers older than any king. Picture a galleon, captain in the year 1610. He stands on the quarterdeck in a wool coat the color of dried blood. His beard is salt stiff. His hands are scarred from rope and rigging. Around his neck hangs a small lead medal, worn smooth by his thumb, with the face of Saint Christopher pressed into the metal. He kisses it every morning before he opens his eyes. He kisses it every night before he sleeps. In between, he gives orders that send 1,000 tons of wood and silver gliding across the Gulf. Each ship carried saints, the way modern ships carry life rafts. There were painted icons in the captain's cabin, small wooden statues bolted to the walls so they would not topple in heavy seas. Candles burned at little altars below deck, even in rough weather. Even when the wax slid sideways and pooled on the boards, sailors prayed to Saint Elmo for safe passage. They prayed to the Virgin of Guadalupe for mercy. They prayed to Saint Nicholas, who watched over those who crossed deep water, and they prayed to him often. The captains believed something else too. They believed the Gulf had its own moods, its own warnings, and that the saints would speak through small signs if a man knew how to listen. A bird that came aboard at the wrong hour, a rope that frayed without reason, a candle that would not stay lit even in still air. These were messages. These were the saints clearing their throats. And on certain voyages, the signs came. There is a story from the port of Veracruz, written down by a Franciscan friar in faded brown ink. He spoke with a captain named Don Alonso de Cardenas, a man who had crossed the Gulf 11 times without losing a single sail. Don Alonso was preparing for his 12th crossing. The cargo was loaded, the water casks were sealed. The chickens in their wicker cages had stopped complaining. Everything was as it should be. Then, on the night before they sailed, a man came down to the docks. He was old. His coat was the grey-green of seaweed dried in the sun. His feet were bare on the cold stones of the quay. He walked straight to Don Alonso, who was checking the lines, and he stood very close, and he said one sentence: "The saints are tired this year." That was all. The old man turned and walked back into the dark streets of Veracruz, and nobody saw him again. Don Alonso asked the dock workers about him. None of them remembered seeing him arrive. None of them could say which way he had gone. The friar wrote down what Don Alonso told him, and he wrote it carefully, because Don Alonso was a serious man, and serious men do not invent stories about strangers on the docks. Don Alonso sailed anyway. He had cargo to deliver. He had a king to answer to. He had a wife in Seville who was waiting for the money that would build her a small house in the hills. He kissed his St. Christopher medal. He gave the order. The galleon slipped from the harbour with the morning tide, and the friar stood on the seawall and watched it go. The ship was called the Nuestra Señora del Rosario. It was last seen near the Tortugas, sailing into a bank of grey cloud. It never reached Havana. It never reached anywhere. The cargo manifest listed silver, cochineal dye, and 83 souls. The Gulf kept all of them. The friar's account is one of dozens like it. Captains who heard whispers in the rigging the night before they sailed. Cabin boys who saw a woman in blue standing at the bow when no woman was aboard. Pilots who watched their compasses spin slowly in clear weather and then settle again, pointing somewhere just slightly wrong. Small things, small signs, the kind of signs the saints were said to send when something was coming. Whether any of it was real is a question nobody can answer 400 years later. Maybe the captains were tired men telling themselves stories. Maybe the strangers on the docks were just beggars looking for coin. Maybe the saints were silent the whole time, and the sea did what the sea always does. But the old man's words have lingered, passed from one telling to the next, soft as a prayer in a dark church. The saints are tired this year. In the small port towns along the Gulf, news of a missing fleet did not arrive like thunder. It crept in slow, the way fog rolls up a beach at dawn. A boat would come in late. A captain would step onto the dock with a face the color of wet ash, and the dock workers would know, before a single word got spoken, that something had gone wrong out there on the blue water. In Veracruz, in Havana, in the little fishing villages with no names on any map, the old men gathered at the taverns and waited. They sat on wooden benches worn smooth by 100 years of waiting. They drank cheap wine and watched the door. When the news finally came, they would nod because they had felt it already, days before, in the way their bones ached, and the gulls flew strange circles over the harbour, the hurricane nobody saw coming. That was the phrase people used, but the old-timers always shook their heads at that phrase. Somebody saw it coming. Somebody always sees it coming. The trouble was that the somebody was usually a fisherman with weathered hands and brown skin, and nobody in the harbour office listened to fishermen. At the general stores that sat along the wharves, the talk would start slow. A barrel of salt fish, a bolt of rough cloth. And somebody would mention the fleet, and the room would go quiet. An old sailor with one cloudy eye might lean against the counter and say he remembered another storm just like it, years back, maybe 20, maybe 30. The years blurred together for him like ink in seawater. He remembered the sky turning the color of a bruise. He remembered the way the air felt thick enough to chew. The women remembered too, in their own way. They remembered which husbands came home and which did not. They remembered the saints they had prayed to, and which saints had answered, and which had stayed silent. In the little stone churches along the coast, candles burned night and day for men whose bodies would never be found. The wax pooled on the floor and hardened into small white mountains. The priests said nothing. They knew better than to make promises about what the Gulf gave back. On the church steps after Mass, the talk would turn to the old stories. There was a tale in some of these towns about a great wave that rose out of the sea every 100 years. It did not come from the wind, it came from below, from whatever it was that lived down there in the dark blue valleys, where light could not reach. The old grandmothers said the wave was hungry. They said it took ships not for the gold, but for the men inside them, because the thing below the water collected sailors the way a child collects shells. The Spanish officials wrote none of this down. Their reports talked about wind speed and barometric pressure and the failure of certain captains to read the sky. They wrote, in their careful Spanish handwriting, about losses and tonnage and the price of cedar planks. They did not write about the wave that came from below. They did not write about the saint statues that wept salt water in 3 churches the night the fleet went down. At the docks, the rope makers and the sail menders traded their own theories. Some blamed the convoy system itself. Too many ships moving together meant that when the storm came, it took them all at once, like a man swatting a cloud of flies. Others blamed the captains. They had been told to sail too late in the season. They had been told to wait for a silver shipment that was 3 weeks behind schedule. Greed had loaded the holds and greed had set the sails. And the Gulf did what the Gulf always does to greedy men. Day, a black cook from one of the surviving boats, sat in a Havana alehouse and told a story that nobody quite believed. He said the sea had gone flat as a mirror an hour before the wind hit, flat enough to see his own face looking back, and in the reflection, just for a moment he had seen a city beneath the water, towers, streets, a bell tower with no bell. Then the wind came, and the city was gone, and so was half the fleet. Nobody believed him, but nobody told him to stop talking either. They bought him another drink, and they listened, because in towns like these, every story was a piece of a map, and nobody yet knew where the map ended. Pull the calendar back 400 years, step out of our time and into the early autumn of 1622. Spain rules the seas with a fleet that stretches across 2 oceans. Her ports run thick with sugar, hides, indigo, cocoa, and the slow, heavy shine of silver. Every year, a great convoy gathers in Havana harbor. Every year, that convoy slips through the Florida Straits and rides the Gulf Stream home. Most years, the ships arrive. Some years, they do not. The fleet of 1622 was one of those years. Picture 28 vessels bobbing at anchor in the Havana roadstead, tall masts swaying like a forest in a slow wind, hulls black with tar, sails the color of old linen, lashed tight against the yardarms, crews moving across the decks like ants on a sugar loaf, soldiers in dented breastplates, priests in dark wool robes, merchants counting their crates one last time. Down in the holds, the cargo sat stacked and silent. Bars of silver from Potosi, bars of gold from New Granada, tobacco from Cuba, indigo from Guatemala, copper ingots heavy as gravestones. The flagship was the Nuestra Señora de Atocha. Her name meant Our Lady of Atocha, after a shrine in Madrid. She was a galleon of about 500 tons, broad in the beam, high in the stern, painted in colors that flaked under the salt sun. Beside her sailed the Santa Margarita, the Nuestra Señora del Rosario, and 24 others. Each one rode low in the water. Each one carried more than her builders had planned for. The bookkeepers in Seville had been waiting 2 years for this shipment. The king had been waiting longer. They left Havana on the 4th of September. The captains knew the date was late. The hurricane season had already cracked its knuckles over the Caribbean, but the war in Europe was hungry for silver, and the orders had come from the palace itself. So the sails opened, and the fleet stood out to sea, and the green water of the harbor turned to the deep blue of the Gulf. By the next afternoon, the sky had changed. A long grey smear stretched across the southern horizon like a bruise. The wind picked up, soft at first, then quick, then loud. The barometer fell. The waves grew tall as church doors. By nightfall, the storm was on them. What happened next survives only in fragments. A few sailors clinging to broken masts. A few priests scribbling in salt-warped journals once they reached shore. The Atocha was driven east toward the Keys of Florida. Her hull struck a reef hidden under the foam. The shock split her open like a dropped melon. She sank in 55 feet of water, taking 260 souls with her. The Santa Margarita went down a few miles away. The Rosario was thrown high onto a sandbar and broke apart in the surf. 6 other ships were lost outright. The rest limped back to Havana with their rigging in ribbons. Spain lost a fortune in a single night. She also lost the men, crewmen from Andalusia and Galicia, African slaves working the bilge pumps, Taino sailors hired off the docks of Santo Domingo, soldiers from Naples, cabin boys from villages whose names never made it into any ledger. The court mourned the silver. The families mourned the rest. But here is the older thread, the one that runs beneath the story. The reefs that killed the Atocha were not new. They had been there for tens of thousands of years. The indigenous people of the Gulf, the Calusa, the Tequesta, the Carancagua farther west, knew these waters in ways the Spanish never bothered to learn. They had names for the shoals. They had songs for the storms. They watched the great wooden ships pass by, and they watched some of them never pass back. Calusa fishermen, paddling out in dugout canoes, found wreckage on their beaches long before any Spaniard arrived to ask after it. Bits of cedar planking, iron nails red with rust, sometimes a body, sometimes a small carved saint, washed smooth by the surf. They took what could be used and left the rest to the tide. To them, the Gulf was not a road between empires. It was a living thing, patient and unimpressed, eating what the strangers fed it. The fleet of 1622 was not the first such feeding. It would not be the last. The Spanish kept sailing. The hurricanes kept coming. The reefs kept waiting, and the deep blue water kept Gath. Word of the missing fleet traveled faster than the ships themselves had ever sailed. By the autumn of 1622, Havana harbor smelled of tar and grief. Sailors came ashore with salt crusted in their beards and stories knotted in their throats. Most would not speak, a few spoke too much, and what they said did not match. Into this harbor came a man named Tomas de Cardona. He was not a hero. He was a clerk. He held a small notebook bound in soft leather and a quill case stained with old ink. The crown wanted answers. The merchants wanted answers most of all. Cardona had been told to gather every survivor he could find and write down what they remembered. He started in the taverns near the wharf. The light there was thick and gold, filtered through small windows, clouded by sea air. Candles burned low in cups of melted tallow. The floors were sticky with spilled rum and tracked sand. Men sat in clusters, with their backs to the walls, the way men sit when they have seen something the sea is not done teaching them. Cardona wrote in a steady hand. He asked simple questions. Where were you when the wind changed? How tall were the waves? Did you see the other ships before they went under? The answers came in pieces. Some men spoke of a sky that turned the color of old bronze. Some spoke of rain so heavy it tasted like nails. One old gunner said the seas simply opened like a mouth and closed again with the Nuestra Señora de Atocha inside it. That account matched the records. Other accounts did not. A young deckhand from the Santa Margarita told Cardona that he had seen lights moving under the water, not the glow of foam. He said, lanterns, lanterns burning beneath the waves, drifting along like a procession in a church. The boy crossed himself 3 times while he spoke. Cardona wrote it down without comment, because his job was to write, not to judge. A cook from a smaller potash said the air had smelled of incense before the storm hit. He could not explain it. He only knew the smell, sweet and dry and holy. And then the mast snapped, and the world tilted, and he was in the water clinging to a barrel of olives. Cardona noted this too. He underlined the word incense, then crossed the line out, then drew it again. The harder questions came later. In the rooms above the taverns, there Cardona spoke with officers. They were polite and careful. They used the proper words. Storm, shore, will of God. But Cardona had learned to listen to the spaces between the words. One captain, a thin man with a tremor in his left hand, told him the convoy had been warned. Warned by whom? Cardona asked. The captain looked at the wall for a long time. By a pilot, he finally said. A Cuban pilot who knew the reefs and the moon and the look of certain clouds. The pilot had begged them to wait another week. The fleet commander refused. There was silver to be delivered, and a king in Madrid who counted days. Cardona wrote that down. Then he scratched it out. Then he wrote it down again in a different notebook. The smaller one he kept inside his coat. He spent 2 months in Havana. He filled both notebooks and started a third. He learned that the official count of lost ships did not match the count the dockworkers gave. He learned that certain cargo holds had been listed as carrying indigo, when sailors swore they had loaded chests of worked gold. He learned that a galleon called the San Miguel had sailed with the convoy and was not on any list he could find afterward, as though the paper itself had forgotten her. By the time Cardona left Havana, he was a thinner man. His hands had grown unsteady. He slept poorly and woke speaking names he did not know. When he delivered his report to the House of Trade in Seville, he handed over only the larger notebook. The smaller one he kept hidden in the lining of his traveling case. And after his death, his nephew found it and could not read most of the pages, because the ink had run, or the writing had been deliberately smudged, or perhaps both. What Cardona learned has never been fully known. The official record speaks of weather. The whispers in Havana spoke of warnings ignored, cargo unlisted, lights beneath the water, and a ship whose name the sea took along with her timbers. Both versions, in their way, are still waiting to be answered. The lights came back into the records again and again. Sailors saw them, fishermen saw them. Sometimes a priest wrote down what a dying man whispered, and the lights were in there too. A Cuban fisherman named Tomas Ortega gave one of the first accounts we still have. He told it to a clerk in Havana in the year 1631, and the clerk wrote it down in careful, slanted letters. Tomas said he was hauling nets near the Tortugas when the wind died. The sea went flat as a polished plate. He said the water turned the color of dark wine in the low evening sun. Then, far off, he saw a soft, pale light hanging above the waves, like a lantern held by no hand. It drifted slow. It moved the way smoke moves when there is no breeze to push it. Tomas crossed himself and watched the light for almost an hour. Then it sank, gentle as a feather, into the water and was gone. He told the clerk that he believed it was the soul of a galleon that never made port. He said he was not afraid. He said the light felt sad, the way an old song feels sad. He went home that night and told his wife, and she told her sister, and the story moved through the town like warm bread passed from hand to hand. A century later, an English merchant captain named Edward Hollis wrote in his journal about something he saw off the coast of what is now Alabama. He was a careful man. His journal is full of weather notes and prices of indigo. He had no reason to lie. He wrote that on a calm night in October, he watched 3 pale yellow lights move together across the dark water. They held a tight formation, he said, like ships sailing in line. He could see no hulls beneath them. He could hear no voices, no wood creaking, no slap of canvas. The lights traveled south for nearly a mile, then dimmed one by one until the sea was empty again. Hollis wrote one line at the bottom of the page that has stayed with people ever since. He wrote, "I have seen ships sail where no ships were." He never explained it further. He just kept writing about indigo. In the swampy parishes of Louisiana, the stories took on a softer shape. An old Cajun woman named Marie Boudreau told a folklorist in the 1930s about something her grandfather had seen as a boy. The grandfather had been out fishing in the marsh with his father at dawn. The fog was thick, and the world was grey. The boy looked up and saw through the mist the tall shape of a sail, a great square sail, billowed full, though there was no wind on the water. He saw it for only a breath. Then the fog closed around it like a curtain. Marie said her grandfather spoke of it only twice in his whole life. Once to his wife, once to her when she was small enough to climb into his lap. He told her the sail looked like it was made of moonlight. He told her he was not scared, just quiet inside, the way a person gets quiet inside a church. A Tampa shrimper named Joaquin Reyes told a newspaper writer in 1952 about a night he spent anchored near the dry Tortugas. He said he woke from sleep because the cabin had gone bright. He climbed up on deck and found the whole sky lit by a single hovering glow. It was the color, he said, of honey held up to a candle. It made no sound. It cast no heat. His dog did not bark. His compass spun slow circles. After a few minutes, the light slid sideways across the sky and dropped into the sea about a half-mile off his bow. The water glowed for another moment, then went dark. Joaquin said he sat on the deck for a long time after that. He said he felt like he had been allowed to see something private, something the Gulf had not meant to show him. He never went back to that spot, though he fished those waters for another 30 years. What ties these accounts together is not fear. Every witness, across centuries and languages, describes the same calm feeling, a quiet wonder, a sense of being near something old and tired and beautiful. None of them claim to know what they saw. They only know they saw it, and they only know that afterward the world felt a little larger and the sea felt a little less empty than before. The first wreck hunters came almost before the wood had time to settle on the seafloor. That is the part that surprises people. We think of treasure hunting as something new, something modern, with brass diving helmets and oxygen lines and grainy black and white photographs. But the truth is older than that. The Spanish were hunting their own lost ships within weeks of losing them, sometimes within days. When a galleon went down in shallow water, the Crown sent a second fleet to find it. These were called salvage expeditions, and they carried indigenous and African divers who could hold their breath for what seemed like forever. The divers went down with weighted ropes and came up with whatever they could grip. Silver bars, coin chests, bronze cannons green with sea rot. The men on deck pulled the ropes up hand over hand, water streaming off the catch like silver rain. But the strange thing, the thing that starts to rhyme across the records, is how often these salvage fleets came back empty, or came back with only a fraction of what the manifest said should be there. A ship would sink with 500,000 pesos of silver on board. The salvage divers would return with 30,000, then 20, then nothing. The Spanish blamed the sand. They blamed the currents. They blamed the storms that came back through the same waters and pushed the wrecks deeper. And those things were real. A wooden hull on a sandy bottom moves like a slow ghost, drifting with each season, sinking inch by inch into the soft floor. A galleon lost in June might be half buried by Christmas. By the next summer, only the masts would show, and those would soon snap and float away. Yet, the salvage captains kept writing the same word in their reports: empty, 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 as if something had gotten there first. In the 1620s, a Spanish official in Havana noticed a pattern that bothered him. He sat in a stone office that smelled of candle wax and damp paper, and he laid out the salvage logs, side by side, 3 different wrecks, 3 different stretches of coast, and, in each case, when the divers finally reached the bones of the ship, the heaviest chests were already broken open. The locks were sprung. The silver was gone. He wrote a letter to Madrid asking how this could be. The letter took 6 months to cross the ocean. The reply, if there ever was one, has never been found. There are other patterns too, and they begin to overlap like circles drawn in wet sand. The same shoals show up again and again in the lost reports: the dry Tortugas, the banks off the Yucatan, the long pale sandbars that run down the Texas coast like the spine of some sleeping animal. Ships kept sinking in the same places, year after year, generation after generation. The captains knew these places were dangerous. They had charts, they had warnings, and still they sailed into them, as if pulled. Wreck hunters in the modern age have found something else that rhymes. When they survey these old graveyards with sonar, they often find more ships than the records say should be there. A reef expected to hold 1 wreck holds 3A. Sandbar marked for a single loss gives up timbers from 4 different centuries, stacked like pages in a forgotten book. The Gulf, it seems, has been collecting ships longer than anyone bothered to write down. And then there are the salvage attempts that never came back. Whole expeditions sent out from Havana or Veracruz with orders to recover a specific cargo, and the salvage fleet itself vanished. A ship sent to find a ship, now needing a 3rd ship to find them both. The records call these losses by clean names: lost with all hands, failed to return. But the men who wrote those words knew what they meant. The Gulf had taken the rescuers too. Stories began to drift through the colonial ports. Sailors said the wrecks were guarded. Some said by spirits of the drowned, walking the seafloor with lanterns that did not need air. Others said by something older, something that had always lived in those warm green waters, watching the wooden hulls come down through the light, like falling leaves. The priests dismissed these tales as the talk of frightened men. The salvage captains nodded politely and changed the subject, but they kept their own counsel about why the chests were always empty when the divers finally reached them, and why the same coasts kept calling ships towards the same bones over and over, like a song the sea remembered better than anyone alive. There is a place in the Gulf where the water turns from deep blue to a soft, pale green in the space of a single oar stroke. Sailors who knew the Gulf called this the warning color. It meant the bottom had come up to meet you. It meant the reef was waiting just below, patient as an old dog asleep in the sun. The reef is not one thing. It is a long, broken spine of coral and limestone and packed sand that runs in scattered pieces along the Florida Keys, around the dry Tortugas, and down toward Cuba. From above, in good light, parts of it look like green clouds drifting under glass. From below, those same shapes are sharp as broken pottery. A diver today can run a hand along the old coral and feel the small, jagged teeth of it now. Picture a wooden ship heavy with silver, riding low in the swell, driven by a wind it cannot fight. The Spanish captains had a name for this kind of ground. They called it the carnivorous coast, not because the reef chewed, but because of what it did once a hull touched it. A galleon was a beautiful thing, built of oak and pine and cedar, sealed with tar and hemp. Below the waterline she wore a copper-colored skin of pitch and barnacles. She was strong in open water. She was helpless in 3 fathoms. The way the old story goes, it would happen like this. A storm would push a ship off her line, maybe only by a mile, maybe only by 100 yards. The lookout would call out the pale green water, and the helmsman would throw his weight against the wheel, and for a long breath, nothing would happen. Then a sound, a low, soft groan from somewhere deep in the wood, almost gentle. That was the keel kissing the reef. The first touch did not kill her. The first touch only opened a seam. Salt water would begin to climb into the hold, one slow finger at a time. The crew would feel the ship grow heavy under their boots. Like a horse that had decided to lie down, they would haul cargo to the rails and throw it over. Cannon, crates of cochineal, sacks of cocoa, sometimes silver bars. Though men were hanged in Havana for tossing the king's silver, and most chose drowning over the rope, while they worked, the swell would lift the ship and drop her again, lift and drop. Each fall was another bite. The reef would open her like a slow knife opens a fish. Planks would split along the grain. Iron nails would pull free with a sound like singing wire. Inside the hold, the great chests would slide and crash, and the air would fill with the smell of wet cedar and gunpowder, and the sour breath of frightened men. This is the part the survivors remembered most, not the storm, not the lightning, the slowness. A galleon on a reef did not sink the way a stern sinks. She came apart over hours, sometimes over days. Men sat on her tilted deck and watched the sea climb their boots. They sang, they prayed, they scratched the names of their wives into the railings with knife points. Some of those railings have been pulled up by divers, and the names are still there, soft as old chalk. Then comes the part that has kept the wreck hunters awake for 400 years. Once a galleon broke up on the reef, her bones did not stay together. The current would scatter her, timbers would drift one way, ballast stones would tumble another. Silver, being heavy, would sink straight down and bury itself in the white sand. Coins would scatter like seeds. A single ship could leave a trail 2 miles long across the seabed, and within a season the coral would begin to grow over her, soft and pale at first, then thick as old bark. Some say the reef ate the ships, others say the reef saved them, holding their cargo in place while the wood rotted away. Both might be true. A galleon that sank in deep water vanished forever. A galleon that struck the reef left a scar that a patient diver could still find if he knew where to look, and if the coral had not yet closed its mouth over the last copper spike. That is the heart of it, not a battle, not a curse, just wood meeting stone in shallow water, again and again across 2 centuries of trade. The Gulf did not need monsters, it had the reef. And the reef was hungry in a way only the slow, soft things of the sea can be. Every great wreck story has a survivor. Most of them died old, drank too much, and told the same tale to anyone who would listen. But the story you're about to hear comes from a boy too small to swing a sword, too young to grow a beard, too poor to own a second shirt. They called him the cook boy, because that was his job. He fed the men who sailed the galleons. His name in the records that still exist was Mateo. He was 11 years old when his ship went down somewhere off the western edge of the Florida shelf. The year was 1631. The ship's name has been lost, scrubbed from the manifests by time and salt and bad ink, but Mateo's account survived, scribbled by a priest in Havana who took pity on the boy and wrote down what he said before he disappeared from history forever. The priest's name was Father Domingo. He was old, half-blind, and known for writing down things other priests refused to touch. His pages still sit in a small archive in Spain, brown as tea leaves, the ink the color of dried blood. And in those pages, Mateo's story waits like a candle in a dark hall. The boy said the storm came at dusk. He said the clouds did not look like clouds. He said they looked like horses, like a herd of black horses running across the sky with their manes burning. He said the wind sounded like a woman singing in a language he did not know. The men laughed at him at first, then the men stopped laughing. When the ship cracked, Mateo was in the galley below decks. He was peeling onions into a copper pot. The pot tipped, the onions rolled, the lantern swung once and went out. He told Father Domingo that the dark was not dark like night. It was dark like the inside of a closed mouth. Water came up through the planks, not down from above, the way water should come into a sinking ship, up from below, cold as river stones. He said it smelled like flowers, not seawater. Flowers, the kind that grow in graveyards, he told the priest, the small white kind that bloom after rain. Mateo climbed. He climbed in pitch black, in flooding salt, with his hands raw from rope burns and onion oil. He came up through a hatch that should have been blocked by a fallen mast. The mast was not there. He came up onto a deck that should have been crowded with screaming men. The deck was empty. He said the ship was still afloat. He said the sails were full. He said the sea around him was calm as a bowl of milk. The horses in the sky were gone. The wind was gone. The men were gone. Every soul on that ship, 73 souls, by the manifest, was simply not there anymore. Not in the water, not on the deck, not below. Gone. Mateo said he sat down on a coil of rope and waited. He waited for 3 days. The ship sailed itself. The sails caught a wind he could not feel on his skin. The wheel turned without hands, and on the 4th morning, the ship slid up onto a sandbar somewhere along the Florida coast. Soft as a baby being laid in a crib, Mateo walked off into the shallow water and waded ashore. He was found by fishermen near a small Spanish outpost. He was sunburned and thin, and his hair had turned white, white as bone, white as the foam on a wave. He was 11 years old, and his hair was the hair of an old man. Father Domingo wrote all of this down. He noted in the margin that the boy did not cry when he told the story. He noted that the boy ate 3 bowls of stew and asked for a 4th. He noted that the boy fell asleep with the spoon still in his hand. And then Father Domingo wrote one more line, in smaller letters, almost as if he was ashamed of writing it. He wrote that when he checked on the boy in the morning, the bed was empty, the sheets were folded, and the spoon was placed neatly on the pillow. Mateo was never seen again, not in Havana, not in Veracruz, not in any port that kept records. He walked off the edge of the world and took his story with him. What remains is one priest's account, brown and brittle, sitting in a box in Spain. A boy who lived, a ship that sailed itself, and a sea that gave up one soul and kept all the rest. Not everyone believed the galleons simply vanished. Not then, not now. There were men along the docks of Havana and Veracruz who heard the stories of lost fleets and shook their heads slowly. They had spent their lives on the water. They knew what storms did, and what reefs did, and what hurricanes left behind. To them, the missing ships were not a mystery at all. They were a crime. These skeptics had a name for the explanation they trusted. They called them the Cedar Hunters, the pirates who followed the smell of fresh-cut wood across the open sea. A Spanish galleon, you see, was a moving forest. Her hull was Cuban cedar. Her decks were pine from the highlands. Her ropes carried the scent of tar and hemp and salt. On a still morning, a sharp-nosed sailor could smell another ship before he could see her sails. The pirates who worked the Gulf in the 1600s used that to their advantage. They sailed low, painted dark, and waited downwind of the shipping lanes like wolves at the edge of a meadow. The skeptics pointed to this and said the answer was simple. The galleons that never came home were not eaten by reefs or swallowed by clouds. They were taken, boarded in the dark, their crews dropped over the rails, their cargo carried off to hidden coves on the coast of Hispaniola or the small green islands south of Florida. Then the empty hulls were burned to the waterline, leaving nothing for the Spanish crown to find. It is a clean explanation. It fits the numbers in some ways. Pirate logs from the 1600s and early 1700s described captures that the Spanish records never mention. Dutch privateers, English buccaneers, French corsairs. They all worked these waters. They all had reason to keep quiet about the richest hauls. A ship full of silver bars and Mexican cochineal was worth a king's ransom, and the men who took it had no interest in writing about it. The skeptics also point to the geography. Many of the so-called vanishing points sit close to known pirate hideouts. The Bay of Campeche, the Florida Keys, the lonely cays off the Yucatan. If you draw the missing fleets on a map, and then draw the pirate harbors on the same map, the two patterns lay across each other like a pair of hands. So far, the skeptics make a strong case. Pirates were real. The Gulf was full of them. Some ships did vanish because men with cutlasses climbed aboard in the small hours. Then comes the part the skeptics cannot explain. A pirate keeps the cargo. That is the whole point. Silver, gold, emeralds, pearls. These things move through markets. They end up in Amsterdam counting houses, or London goldsmith shops, or the private coffers of governors who looked the other way. The historians who study piracy can track those flows. They can follow the money, and the money does not add up. The amount of treasure listed on the lost manifests of the Gulf fleets is staggering. Tons of silver, mountains of coin. If pirates had taken even half of those vanished cargoes, the markets of Europe and the Caribbean would have flooded. Prices would have shifted, records would have shown the bulge. Instead, the silver simply disappears from the story. It is loaded in Veracruz, it is logged in Havana, and then it is gone, with no buyer, no seller, no thief growing fat in a tavern on the proceeds. The skeptics have an answer for this too. They say the pirates buried it. They say the treasure sits in caves on small islands waiting. But buried treasure is mostly a story. Real pirates spent their gold fast and loud. They did not sit on it. They did not pass it down. There is one more thing the skeptics cannot quite answer: the wrecks. When divers in the modern era began finding Spanish hulls on the Gulf floor, those hulls were not empty. They held cannons. They held coins. They held cargo still strapped to the broken decks. A pirate would have taken these things. A storm would not. So the boarding theory works for some ships. It cannot work for all of them. The numbers are too large. The market's too quiet. The wrecks too full. Even the skeptics, when pressed, will admit this. They will sip their coffee and look out at the water and grow quiet. Pirates took plenty. The Gulf took more. And what the Gulf took, it kept in a way no human hand could match. That is the gap in the skeptic's story. It is a wide gap, wide enough to lose a fleet inside. There are people along the Gulf who do not need a museum to tell them what is true. They have grandfathers. They have small wooden boxes tucked behind the rosary on the kitchen shelf. They have a name they have said since they were small, and that name is the San Miguel. Ask them about it. In Tampico, in Campeche, in the old fishing villages south of Mobile, and you will hear the same answer in different accents. The San Miguel was a galleon. She left a New World port in the late 1600s, loaded with chests of silver and bales of indigo and a small black cross said to have come from a chapel in Puebla. She never reached Havana. She never reached Spain. She sank somewhere in the wide green middle of the Gulf. And the people who tell her story do not waver when they tell it. They will describe her sails the color of old cream. They will describe the carved saint on her prow, his hand lifted in a blessing, his painted robes worn down to bear wood by salt. They will tell you the number of her cannons. They will tell you the captain's last name. None of this is written in any official record that historians can find. Yet, the story stays the same from family to family, passed down like a recipe, kept warm by repetition. Sister Inés of Veracruz spoke about the San Miguel in 1904. She was an old woman by then, small as a folded napkin, her hands like dry paper. She told a visiting writer that her great-grandmother had washed the linen of a sailor who survived the wreck. The sailor had been pulled from the sea by a fishing boat off the coast of Yucatan. He spoke of a sky that turned the color of bruised plums. He spoke of a wave taller than the bell tower at the cathedral. He gave the linen woman a coin and asked her to pray for the cook. Sister Inés still had the coin. She showed it to the writer without ceremony, as if showing him a button. In a village near Tuxpan, an old man named Diego kept a piece of wood under his bed. It was dark and heavy and smelled faintly of cedar even after 300 years. His grandfather had pulled it from the surf during a calm dawn in 1870, along with a bent iron nail and a small chip of green glass. The family had decided the wood belonged to the San Miguel, because that was the ship the sea was always trying to give back. Nobody from outside the family had ever asked to see it. Diego did not mind. He was not waiting to be believed. This is what marks the believers. They are not loud. They do not write letters to universities. They do not climb onto stages. They simply hold what they hold and answer when asked. Their calm is the calm of people who have already made peace with being doubted. It has cost them, of course. A school teacher in Cancun lost her job in the 1960s after she spent a year of weekends sketching maps of where the San Miguel might lie. Her director called the project unserious. She kept sketching anyway. Her granddaughter still has the maps, folded in a tin lunchbox, painted with red roses. The lines are soft now, drawn in pencil that has begun to fade. But the coastline is still there, and the small inked cross still marks the place the teacher believed her ship was sleeping. A fisherman in Pensacola talked about the San Miguel on a local radio show in 1978. He said he had seen her shape under his boat, one still morning, a long dark form like a sleeping whale, ribs showing through silt. He was laughed at for a week and then forgotten. He kept fishing the same water until he died. He never tried to prove anything. When his son asked him why he had spoken at all, he said it was because the ship had been quiet long enough. That is what the believers seem to share, a sense that silence is a kind of debt. The San Miguel may never be found. Her name may never appear in a Spanish ledger that can be matched to a hull on the seabed. The historians may shrug and move on, yet The small wooden boxes stay on the kitchen shelves. The coins stay wrapped in cotton. The stories stay in the mouths of grandchildren, who learn them the way other children learn lullabies, slow and sure and without question. The Spanish kept careful books. They counted bars of silver, sacks of cochineal, chests of pearls, and crates of cocoa. They listed sailors by name, by birthplace, by the wages owed to their widows. They wrote down the weather, the saints they prayed to, the wind on the morning a ship left port. But the books only tell half the tale. The other half lives in the land itself, along the bent coast of the Gulf, where the soil and the trees and the slow brown rivers seem to remember things the clerks never wrote down. Walk the long beach near Padre Island on a still morning, and you can feel it. The sand there moves in low ridges, soft as a sleeping animal. In some places, the dunes hold the shape of something underneath, a long curve like a hull pressed into the earth from below. Old fishermen will tell you certain spots feel heavy. The gulls don't land, the crabs don't dig, the grass grows thinner there, even when the rain comes generous and the sun stays kind. Farther down, past the salt flats and the mangrove tangles, there are oak trees that lean strange. They grow with their crowns tilted inland, as though something on the seaside once pushed them, and they never forgot the push. Botanists say it was the great hurricanes, the storms that came through and never came back the same way twice. The local people tell a different story. They say the trees lean because of what they saw. They say the wind that knocked them sideways carried voices, and the trees turned their heads to listen and never turned back. In one stretch of marsh near the Louisiana line, the ground refuses to hold a foundation. Settlers tried to build there in the 1800s, and the houses sank within a generation. Engineers studied the soil and found nothing strange, just the usual soft delta clay. But the families who lived nearby kept their distance. They said the marsh had taken something long ago, and what the marsh takes, the marsh keeps, and what the marsh keeps, the marsh guards. Old maps from the Spanish period show a small inlet there that no longer exists. The inlet was wide enough for a galleon to slip inside and find shelter from a coming storm. The inlet closed sometime in the 1600s, sealed by silt and time. What sat at the bottom of it when the door swung shut? No one knows. The rivers tell their own quiet stories. The Brazos changed its course 3 times in the colonial era, swinging like a long brown ribbon across the Texas plain. Each time it moved, it left behind old beds, dry channels that fill with grass and wildflowers in the spring. Cowboys, riding those channels in the 1880s, reported finding strange things in the dirt. A piece of carved cedar, a bronze ring once, a small iron crucifix turned green with age, lying flat in the middle of a pasture 40 miles from the sea. How does a crucifix from a ship's altar end up in a Texas pasture? The river knows. The river isn't telling. There is a meadow on the Florida Panhandle, ringed by slash pine, where the deer will not graze. Hunters have noticed it for generations. The grass grows lush and sweet, the kind of grass deer should love, but the herds walk around it. Dogs whine and circle wide. The local story says a Spanish landing party came ashore there after a wreck in the 1500s. They were sick, they were starving, and they did not last long. No marker stands in the meadow. No bones have ever been found, but the deer know something, and the dogs know something, and the meadow stays empty even in the soft hours of dusk, when every other clearing fills with life. The Spanish records do not mention these places. The clerks in Seville never heard of the leaning oaks, or the sinking marsh, or the meadow the deer refuse. They counted what they could count, in ink, on paper, by candlelight. The rest stayed behind in the land, written in slower ink, in the curve of a root, the silence of a sandbar, the shape of a dune at low tide. You can read it if you walk slow enough. You can hear it if you stop talking and let the wind do the speaking. The Gulf Coast is a long, quiet book, and most of its pages have never been turned. The ones who turned them came home changed, and what they learned, they mostly kept to themselves. There is a song the old sailors used to sing in the ports along the Gulf. It came in many shapes, but the heart of it was always the same. A ship goes down. The bells inside her keep ringing, and on certain nights, when the water lies flat as a polished plate, you can still hear them under the waves. Sailors in Veracruz sang it. Sailors in Havana sang it. Sailors in Mobile and New Orleans learned the tune from men who had crossed from Cadiz, and they passed it on in their own tongues. The song does not name one ship. That is the strange thing about it. It names a sound. It tells of a slow, low chiming that rises up through the hull of a fishing boat at midnight, soft as a heartbeat. Some versions say the bells call the names of the drowned. Other versions say they only call the next man to join them. Either way, the listener is meant to cross himself, pour a little rum into the sea, and turn the boat home. You can find the same idea up and down the coast, with different faces, in the cold grey waters of Lake Superior. The iron miners sang about the bell of the Edmund Fitzgerald, long before that ship even existed, only they called it by other names in the foggy harbours of New England. Whalers told of sunken churches off the rocks of Cape Ann, where the steeples had toppled into the surf, and the bells still tolled the hours from below. Down in the Florida Keys, the wreckers spoke of a brass bell that rang under the reef at Loo Key, marking the grave of a British warship that broke its back in 1744. The pattern repeats so often, it feels like a thread stitched through the whole country. A ship goes missing. The people who loved her cannot bear the silence, so they give her a voice. They give her a bell that keeps ringing, even after the wood has rotted, and the iron has crumbled, and the bones have settled into the sand. The Spanish galleons gathered more of these stories than any other ships in American waters. There were simply more of them, and they carried more weight, and they sank in greater numbers. By the late 1600s, the songs about drowned bells had spread from the docks of Cartagena all the way to the bayous of Louisiana. Creole fishermen sang them in French. Tejano vaqueros sang them in Spanish from the saddle, riding the long beaches where the 1553 fleet had broken apart 2 centuries before. The melodies changed, the bells stayed. There is a tale from the small town of Campeche that fits the pattern almost too neatly. An old shrimper, sometime in the 1800s, swore he had heard the bells of the San Miguel ringing under his boat on the feast day of the saint himself. He claimed the sound rose for exactly the length of one prayer, then faded. He went home that night and told his wife to light a candle. She did. The candle burned for 3 days without going out, and the wax never seemed to lower in the cup. Or so the story goes. The shrimper died old and poor, and his grandchildren still light a candle every September. You can call it superstition. Many have. A folklorist named Stith Thompson catalogued hundreds of these underwater bell legends across the Americas in the early 20th century, and he found versions in nearly every coastal community he visited. He thought the stories grew from the simple human need to mark a grave that could not be visited. The sailor's family had no headstone to tend, so they made a sound instead. Others see something else in the pattern. They point out that bells were often the heaviest single piece of metal aboard a colonial ship, and that they sometimes survived the wreck intact while everything else broke down. Divers have, in fact, pulled bells from wrecks in the Gulf that were still capable of ringing after 400 years on the bottom. The brass holds. The clapper rusts away, but the shape endures. It is not impossible, the believers say, that a current passing through a half-buried bell could move it just enough to chime. Which version is true hardly matters to the song. The song does not care about physics or folklore. It only asks the listener to remember, to pour the rum, to say the names, to understand that the Gulf is full of voices, and that some of them are still calling, in a slow, patient rhythm, older than any flag that ever flew above these waters. There is a stretch of coast along the Florida Panhandle where the sand runs white as powdered sugar. The water comes in slow green waves. Locals walk that beach in the early morning when the tide pulls back and the wet sand gleams like a long mirror. And every few years, somebody finds a coin. The coins come in different shapes. Some are round and worn smooth. Some are square with the edges clipped off. Some are blackened almost beyond reading. But when you turn them in your hand and tilt them toward the sun, you can still see the old marks: a cross, a castle, a pair of pillars wrapped in a banner. These are the marks of the Spanish crown, stamped onto silver, pulled from mines deep inside Mexico and Peru. They were carried into ships that never reached home. People have been finding these coins for as long as the coast has been settled. A farmer in the 18th century pulled one out of a turtle nest. A woman in the 19th century watched her young son dig up a small green lump that turned out to be 8 reales, fused to a piece of barnacle. After a hurricane in 1949, a man walking his dog near Sebastian Inlet picked up so many coins he filled his hat. The Gulf gives them up slowly. It hides most of them, but every storm shakes the seabed and rolls a few onto the sand like a sleeper turning in a long dream. The coins are not the only things that wash ashore. In a museum in Pensacola, you can see a brass buckle the size of a child's palm, green with age, the kind a Spanish soldier wore on his belt. Beside it sits a clay olive jar, cracked but whole, its mouth still sealed with a plug of pitch. Beside that, a piece of cedar planking with iron nails sunk into the grain. The wood was found buried under 12 feet of sand on Santa Rosa Island. Nobody knows which ship it came from. The nails were forged in a style used in Spain in the early 1600s. The cedar grew somewhere in Cuba. There are letters too, not famous ones, just small mentions in old Spanish papers that historians stumble across by accident. One letter, written by a priest in Veracruz in 1624, complains about a missing chest of silver candlesticks. He writes that the chest was meant for a chapel in Sevilla. He writes that the ship carrying it never arrived. He writes the name of the ship, and then he writes in a small, careful hand that the captain was a good man who prayed every morning. That is all. The letter goes on to talk about wine and the price of corn, but that single mention sits there in the archive, waiting, 400 years old. Other objects have surfaced in places that make no sense. A silver crucifix found in the root system of a fallen oak miles inland from Apalachicola. A bronze cannon, half eaten by salt, dragged up by a shrimp boat off the coast of Galveston. A piece of a ship's bell, with letters cast into the rim that spell out a saint's name, found in a creek bed after a flood pushed it out of the mud. Each of these things should not be where it was found. Each of them tells you a wooden ship went down nearby, broke apart over decades, and let its pieces drift on slow currents into strange resting places. Collectors keep some of these objects in glass cases. Museums keep others under soft yellow light. But a great many sit on shelves in private houses, passed down through families who don't quite remember which grandfather picked them up off the beach. A coin in a drawer in Mobile, a nail in a coffee can in Corpus Christi, a small green saint, no bigger than a thumb, sitting on a windowsill in Tampa for so long that nobody asks where it came from anymore. These are the pieces of the puzzle that survived. They are not enough to tell the whole story. They cannot give you the name of every ship, or the face of every sailor, or the weight of every cargo, but they make the story hard to set aside. You can hold a coin in your hand. You can feel the cold weight of it. You can press your thumb against the stamped castle and know that somebody in a leather apron struck that mark 4 centuries ago, in a city far across the sea, never imagining that the coin would end up here, in your palm, on a quiet coast that swallowed the ship that carried it. In the small fishing towns along the Gulf, the stories never quite died. They moved from grandmothers to grandchildren, from porch swings to kitchen tables, carried on the steam of strong coffee and the smell of warm bread. The Spanish records say little about mermaids. The Spanish records say little about a lot of things. But the families who lived along that long curve of coast, from Veracruz up through the bayous and over to the white sands of Florida, kept their own books. Those books were not written down. They were spoken, sung, and remembered. The oldest version of the tale comes from a stretch of beach near Tampico. There, a fisherman's family told of a great-great-grandmother who had been a girl when the fleet went missing. She said her own grandmother had walked the shore the morning after the storm. The sand was still warm from the rain. The woman could not speak Spanish. She could not speak the local tongue. She sang, though. She sang low and slow, like water moving through a hollow shell. The family took her in. They fed her fish broth and warm tortillas, and for 3 days she sat by the window and watched the sea like she was waiting for something to come back. On the 4th morning she was gone. The bed was empty. The window was open, and on the floor lay a single silver coin, stamped with the cross of Spain. That coin, the family said, passed down through 6 generations. It is supposed to still exist, kept in a tin box, somewhere in a small house outside Veracruz. Nobody outside the family has ever seen it. The priests did not like these stories. In the 17th century, a Franciscan named Brother Esteban traveled the coast, collecting them, not to save them, but to burn them. He believed the tales drew people away from the church. He believed mermaids were the devil's work. He kept a journal of every story he gathered, and then, the legend says, he tossed the journal into the fire at a chapel near Campeche. But journals are stubborn things. A neighbor pulled the half-burned book from the ashes after Brother Esteban went to bed. That neighbor copied what he could read. The copy passed through the hands of merchants and sailors, and ended up, 200 years later, in a private library in New Orleans. Scholars have argued for decades about whether the document is real. Some say it is a clever forgery from the 1800s. Others say the paper is older than that, and the ink older still. Either way, the families along the coast did not need a burned book to remember. In Galveston, a Creole grandmother told her grandchildren about a great-uncle who had heard singing under the waves while pulling in his nets. The voices were not Spanish or French or English. They sounded older than any language he knew. He cut his net loose and rowed home and never fished that stretch of water again, in a small Cuban-American family in Tampa. The holiday story was about a great-grandfather who had served as a deckhand on a salvage boat in the 1890s. He claimed he had seen a pale arm reach up from the dark water and place a piece of broken pottery on the rail of his ship. When he turned around, the arm was gone. The pottery, painted with blue flowers, sat in his family's china cabinet for almost 100 years before a hurricane took the house. The stories shift with each telling. Some versions have mermaids. Some have drowned sailors who come back to warn the living. Some have only a song, drifting in from somewhere past the horizon. Details change. The hair color shifts. The coin becomes a comb, then a piece of carved coral, then a coin again. But every version begins the same way. A fleet went down. The sea did not give everything back. And whatever climbed out of the water that first dark morning was not quite what anyone expected. Folklorists call these stories memory wrapped in metaphor. The grief was too large to speak plainly, so the families turned it into something with a tale and a song. Others say the stories are simpler than that. They say the families remember because something really did wash ashore. The records will not tell you which is true. The records, as always, are quiet about the things that matter most. Step away for a moment from the arguments. Let the maps fold themselves shut. Let the manifests slide back into their leather folders. Let the divers come up for air and leave their flippers on the dock. There's a quieter thing underneath all of it, and you can only hear it when the louder voices grow tired. Somewhere in the records of a small Cuban port, almost too faint to read, a clerk wrote a single line about a galleon that sailed into a cloud. He did not write the ship's name. He did not write the date with any care. He wrote it the way you jot down a dream before forgetting it. The galleon left the harbor on a soft morning. The sea was the color of old pewter. A low bank of mist sat out past the headland like a sleeping animal. The ship slid into that mist with all her sails full, and she did not come out the other side. That is the whole entry. No survivors, no wreckage, no follow-up, just a galleon and a cloud and a silence that lasted 400 years. Scholars who have read that line tend to shrug. Clouds do not eat ships. A storm came up. A reef caught her keel. Some honest cause swallowed her, and the clerk simply did not know it yet. When he set down his pen, that is almost certainly true. The Gulf has more honest causes than any sea on earth. Sand that shifts in a single tide. Coral that rises in the dark, like a fist. Wind that turns from southwest to north, between one prayer and the next. But here is the quieter truth. It did not matter to the people on the dock whether the cause was honest. What mattered was that the ship was gone. What mattered was that a brother did not come home, and a wife stood on the seawall for 3 months looking at the same patch of horizon, and a child grew up sketching boats in the margins of a catechism because his father had promised to teach him knots. The cloud was the only answer anyone could give that child. The cloud was kinder than the truth. That is how a legend is born, not from lies, from kindness. You can see it in the way the story spread. Sailors carried it to Veracruz, where it became a tale about a fog that drank the sound of bells. Fishermen carried it to the Yucatan coast, where it became a tale about a saint who hides ships to keep them from worse harm. In New Orleans, generations later, an old Creole woman told a traveler that her grandmother had spoken of a galleon that left port and entered the next world through a door made of mist. Each version held the same small bone at its center. A ship went into something soft and never came back. You can stand on certain beaches at dawn and feel why the story took. The Gulf in early morning is not quite water and not quite air. The horizon dissolves. The pelicans drift across a grey that has no top and no bottom. A pelican fades into that grey the way a thought fades from the mind. If a wooden ship slipped into that greyness, you would not be sure, even watching, whether it had truly been there a moment ago. The eye refuses to commit. The world refuses to choose. This is what folklore knows that legends do not. The exact cause of a loss matters less than the shape of a loss. A community shapes itself around an absence the way a river shapes itself around a stone. The galleon that sailed into a cloud became a way for whole towns to grieve what they could not name. A way for widows to put down the lantern at last. A way for old men to explain to grandchildren why they crossed themselves when the marine layer rolled in. Whether one specific ship truly vanished into one specific bank of fog, the story is still true. It is true in the way that a song is true. It carried something heavy from one generation to the next, without breaking under the weight. The skeptics are right, the believers are right, and underneath them both, a clerk in a small Cuban port set down his pen, and a woman on a seawall finally turned to walk home, and a cloud lifted off the water as if it had never held anything at all. The Gulf kept the ship, the people kept the story. Both have done their work without complaint for 400 years. Picture yourself now on a stretch of Gulf coast at night. The land behind you is low and quiet. Seagrass bends in a soft wind. Sand stretches out in pale ribbons, and the water meets it with a slow, steady hush. There are no towns close enough to throw light, only the stars above, and more stars than you remember being there. The air is warm and heavy. It smells like salt and old wood, and something green growing in the marsh. A frog calls once from far inland, then nothing. The wind shifts, and you can hear the small clicks of crab claws on driftwood. You can hear the slap of a fish jumping somewhere out past the breakers. The fog is coming in. You see it first as a thinning of the stars near the horizon. Then it spills across the water like spilled milk, soft and slow. It rolls over the small waves without making a sound. Within a few minutes, the world has shrunk down to a circle around you, maybe 20 paces wide. The stars overhead are still bright, but the sea has disappeared into white. This is the same coast where the fishermen used to come. Old men in small wooden boats, with nets piled at their feet and lanterns hung from short poles. They worked through the night because the fish ran better in the cool dark. They knew this stretch the way you know the inside of your own house. Every bar, every channel, every place where the bottom dropped away. And these were the men who said they heard voices in the fog. Not always, not every night, but on certain nights when the wind died and the fog came down, thick as a wool blanket, the voices would start, soft at first, like men talking on a porch a long way off. Spanish, the fisherman said, the old Spanish, the kind nobody spoke anymore, slow and stately, with the rounded words their grandfathers used to mock. Sometimes there would be a single voice calling out a name, sometimes a whole crew speaking all at once, the way sailors do when they pull on a rope together. There were songs too, low, rough songs, half remembered, fading in and out, as if a door were opening and closing somewhere in the fog. The fishermen never panicked. They were used to strange things on the water. They would lift their lanterns, peer into the white and listen. Some made the sign of the cross. Some answered back in their own Spanish, calling out hellos, asking who was there. The voices never answered them direct. They only kept on with their own conversations, as if the living men were not there at all. Stand on this beach long enough, and you start to understand it. The Gulf holds on to things. You can feel it in the way the fog presses against your skin. You can feel it in the way the air goes still. right before a wave breaks. There is a weight here that has nothing to do with water. It is the weight of years. The weight of cargo that never reached harbor. The weight of names nobody finished writing down. Look up. The stars are still there above the fog, scattered thick as sand. The same stars the galleon captains used to steer by. The same stars that watched the ships go under, one by one, century after century. Those captains looked up at exactly this sky. They squinted at exactly these points of light. And then the storm came, or the shoal rose up, and they went down with their hands still on the wheel. A small wave breaks somewhere close. You cannot see it, you only hear it, a soft tumbling sound, like a sigh. You are very small here. That is the truth of it. Small under the stars, small at the edge of this old sea, small inside the long story of all the people who have stood on this same sand. The fishermen knew this. That is why they were not afraid of the voices. They understood. They were guests in a place where many others had come before, and many others were still here in some way they could not quite name. The fog thickens. The world narrows. Somewhere out beyond the breakers, where the bottom drops into deeper water, there are timbers settled into the sand, iron rings, broken jars, coins stacked in patterns that nobody living arranged. You stand in the dark a little longer. You listen. The gulf breathes in, the gulf breathes out. There was a mapmaker in Veracruz, whose name has been worn smooth by time. Some old records call him Don Esteban. Others just call him the cartographer of the harbor. He lived in a small white house near the seawall, and his windows faced the open gulf. From those windows he could see every ship that came and every ship that left. For 40 years he drew the coast. He drew the reefs and the shoals, and the deep blue trenches where the bottom fell away. He drew the safe channels in red ink, and the dangerous ones in black. Spanish captains paid good silver for his charts. They trusted his lines more than they trusted their own eyes. Then the fleets began to vanish. Not one at a time, the way ships had always been lost, but in groups, whole flotillas, swallowed by storms that came from clear skies. Galleons that left Havana and never reached Veracruz. The mapmaker would stand at his window for hours, waiting for sails that never appeared on the horizon. People in the town said his hair turned white in a single season. He stopped sleeping. He lit candles all night and bent over his desk, redrawing the gulf again and again. He scratched out old reefs and added new ones. He erased islands that other sailors swore they had seen. He drew currents that twisted in shapes no ocean current had ever made. His neighbors heard him talking to the maps. They heard him arguing with the paper, pleading with it, asking it where the ships had gone. By the second year, he was drawing things that did not belong on any chart. Long shapes beneath the water, bells at the bottom of the sea, faces in the foam where the waves broke against the rocks. The townspeople in Veracruz remember him still. In the soft way old cities remember their broken hearts. They say he went mad because the gulf could not be mapped. They say a man who tries to draw the unknowable will lose his mind, because the unknowable will not hold still on paper. It moves, it hides, it pulls itself back into the deep when the ink touches it. Out of his story, a tradition grew every year. In the weeks before hurricane season, fishermen in the old quarter gather at the seawall at dusk. They bring small paper boats they have folded themselves. On each paper boat, they write the name of a ship that was lost, or the name of a sailor in their family who never came back. The names go back centuries. Some of them are written in handwriting copied from older paper boats, copied from older ones still. The names pass down like rosary beads. They light the little boats and set them on the water, The harbor fills with floating flames. From a distance it looks like the gulf is full of stars that fell from the sky and forgot how to rise again. The candles drift out past the breakwater, and the current takes them toward the horizon, toward the deep water where the galleons lie. The festival has no official name. The church never blessed it. The priests in colonial times tried to stop it more than once, calling it a pagan thing, a leftover from older beliefs, but the fishermen kept doing it anyway, quietly, the way people keep doing things that matter, when no one is watching. Now it happens in plain view, and tourists come to see it, though most of them do not know what they are looking at. The Mapmaker's house is still there, or at least the foundation is. A small plaque marks the spot. The plaque does not explain who he was or why he went mad. It only says, in Old Spanish, he drew the sea and the sea drew him. That is all. The rest you have to learn from the old women who sell flowers near the cathedral, or from the fishermen who mend their nets at the foot of the seawall. Veracruz carries this mystery in a way other places do not. The town has been shaped by ships that never arrived. Its bakeries serve bread named after lost galleons. Its lullabies mention sailors who sleep in the deep. Children learn to count by reciting the names of vanished fleets. The Gulf is not just water here. It is a neighbor, a relative, an old grandfather who took the family treasures and will not say where he buried them. The Mapmaker died in his small white house, surrounded by charts that made no sense to anyone but him. His final map, the one he was working on at the end, has never been found. Some say his apprentice burned it. Some say the sea came one night and took it back. There was a diver named Tomas Reyes who left the Gulf in 1978 and never went back. He had been born in Campeche, raised on stories of sunken fleets, and he learned to hold his breath before he learned to read. By the time he was 30, he had touched more colonial wood than most museum curators. He had felt the soft pulp of cedar beams crumbling under his gloved fingers. He had seen the green crust of silver bars, stacked like loaves of bread, on the sand. The story he carried out of the Gulf was not a happy one. He told it later, in a small apartment in Tampa, to anyone who would listen over a cup of strong coffee. Of that apartment were the color of old butter. A single window looked out over a parking lot, and beyond that, a strip of tired palms that bent in the afternoon wind. He kept one photograph on a shelf, framed in cheap brass. It showed a younger Tomas standing on the deck of a salvage boat, holding a blackened coin the size of a saucer. He told people he had found too much silver. That was always how he put it. Not enough. Too much. The dive happened off a stretch of coast he would never name. He said it was somewhere between Tampico and the reefs that curl north toward Texas. The water there was the color of weak tea, stirred up by river mud, and visibility dropped to nothing once you passed 30 feet. He and 3 others worked from a wooden boat with a patched hull and a compressor that coughed like an old dog. They had a chart drawn in pencil on the back of a grocery bag. They had a hunch, and they had the kind of hunger that turns men into ghosts. What they found, he said, was a hill of silver under a roof of broken planks. The bars had fused together over 4 centuries into one black mountain. Coral grew across the top, like frost on a window pane. Small fish darted in and out of the spaces between the ingots. The wood above them was no longer wood. It was the memory of wood, soft as wet paper, holding its shape only because the sea had not yet decided to take it. Tomas surfaced once, then went back down. He surfaced a second time. The third time, he stayed on the boat and would not go in again. He never explained exactly why. He would only say that the silver had a sound to it. A low hum, he said, like a bell rung underwater, far away. He said the sound got inside his chest and stayed there for weeks. The other 3 divers kept working. 2 of them died within a year. 1 drowned on another job off the Yucatan. The other was killed in a bar fight in Veracruz over a debt nobody could later explain. The 3rd man simply disappeared. His boat was found drifting empty near Isla de Lobos, the engine still running. A half-eaten sandwich on the bench. Thomas heard about each one from a distance, in letters that took weeks to arrive. He moved north. He took work on shrimp boats, then on a charter that ran tourists out to see dolphins. He never dove for treasure again. He kept the 1 coin he had pulled from the wreck on that first day, and he kept it wrapped in a handkerchief inside a cigar box on his shelf. He would show it to people, but he would not let them hold it. The story traveled with him. He told it in Tampa, then in Mobile, then in a small house outside Pensacola where he lived out his last years. Each time he told it, the location of the wreck moved a little. Each time, the hill of silver grew a little taller in the telling. Folklorists who came to visit him near the end wrote down 3 different versions in 3 different notebooks. None of them matched. All of them felt true. What remained constant was the warning. Tomas always ended the same way. The Gulf, he said, does not give up its silver for free. The men who take too much pay a price they did not know they owed. Whether he believed this as a literal fact, or as the only shape his grief could take, no one could say. He died in 2009. The coin was buried with him, at his request, somewhere off a coast he would not name. A black mountain of silver still sits beneath a roof of vanished wood, humming its low note into water no one has yet learned to read. The Gulf of Mexico holds on to things in a way no other sea quite does. It is warm and patient, a great basin of green water that looks soft from the shore. The bottom is mostly sand and silt, the color of pale honey near the coast, fading to a deep blue mud farther out. Currents move slow and steady through it, like a sleeper turning under a blanket, and once something settles down there, the Gulf begins its long, quiet work of keeping it. Wood that lies in salt water does not stay wood for long. The worms come first, small as grains of rice, and they eat the planks from the inside out. Then the sand drifts in, grain by grain, and covers what the worms leave behind. Iron nails rust into orange clouds, and then into nothing. Cannons grow shells until they look like coral pillars. A whole galleon, given enough centuries, becomes a low hill on the seafloor with a few rib bones poking through, like the ghost of a sleeping whale. This is how the Gulf keeps what it takes, not by hiding things in some deep, dark trench, but by softening them, by blending them into the ground beneath the waves until they are part of the place itself. And that is why no one will ever finish counting the lost ships. You can survey a stretch of coast with sonar and find dozens of wrecks in a single week. You can drag magnets across the sand and pull up musket balls and silver bars. But for every wreck you find, there is another that has been worn down to almost nothing, scattered across an acre of seabed by 400 years of slow tides. The Gulf does not give up its dead in neat piles. It mixes them with the world. The Spanish records list certain fleets, certain names, certain manifests. Yet historians who have studied those papers for their whole lives still admit the same thing. The records are incomplete. Small ships sailed without papers. Side runs slipped out of harbors at night. Cargo was loaded that was never written down. and sailors signed on under names that were not their own. The colonial economy moved more silver, more cocoa, more cochineal, and pearls and indigo than any ledger ever captured, and every season some part of that hidden trade slipped into the water and stayed there. So the question that lingers is not really how many ships went down. The question is what the world looked like to the people who sailed them. What did Havana smell like at dawn when a fleet was loading for the Atlantic crossing? What songs did the cook boys sing in the galley? What prayers did a captain whisper when the sky turned the color of an old bruise and the wind began to lean? The land records can tell you how many bars of silver were shipped from Veracruz in a given year. They cannot tell you the name of the boy who carried them down to the dock. The Gulf knows those names. It has held them a long time. It holds them still. And the old stories know it too. The shrimpers who pull up coins in their nets. The grandmothers who tell their grandchildren about the lights that move under the waves on certain summer nights. The divers who come back from a quiet reef saying the water felt different down there, heavier somehow, as if a great hand had passed nearby. None of these are proof of anything, but they are the soft edges of a mystery that refuses to harden into fact. Maybe that is the gift of it, a story that stays open, lets every generation walk into it fresh. A child standing on a beach in Texas, picking up a green-crusted coin, becomes part of the same long tale as a Spanish cookboy in 1622, and a wreck hunter in 1965, and a fisherman in 1840 who heard bells in the fog. The Gulf links them all. It keeps their stories the way it keeps the wood and the silver, softened, mixed together, never quite gone. You could spend a lifetime chasing the answers and never find the bottom of them. The water is too wide, the seasons are too many, the hurricanes still come, and the sand still drifts, and somewhere out beyond the last channel marker, the slow, patient work of forgetting goes on without us. The Gulf does not need us to solve it, it only asks that we keep wondering, and as long as people stand on those quiet shores and look out at the long green water, the wandering will go on. The door stays open, the story keeps breathing. The lost fleets sail on, just under the surface, where nothing finishes and nothing ends. So here we are, at the end of the long telling. The fire has burned down to soft red coals. The wind has settled into a hush. Outside, somewhere far from this room, the Gulf is doing what it has always done. It is breathing in and out against 1,000 miles of curving shore. Think of it now. The water stretches dark and wide, under a sky pricked full of stars. The waves roll in long, slow lines, silver where the moonlight catches them, black between. A warm breeze moves over the surface, like a hand brushing silk. Somewhere out there, beneath the gentle swell, lies a city of wood and iron and bone. A city no one has fully mapped, a city no one ever will. The galleons rest where they fell. Some lie in shallow sand, their ribs poking up like the spines of old whales. Some sit deep in the dark, wrapped in coral, hidden by silt, the color of cocoa. Their bells have grown crusted and silent. Their cannons sleep with their mouths full of small fish. Their cargo waits, scattered across the sea floor, each silver coin a small green moon under the water. And the question we started with has no clean answer. We do not know how many ships went down. We do not know how many men and women and children were aboard them. We do not know how much treasure was logged on paper that never matched the treasure pulled from the ground. The land kept its records in neat books. The sea kept its records in another way.